The transport plane landed just before sunrise, when the base was still half asleep, and the desert air was cool for a short while. Dust rose as the wheels hit the ground, and a few Marines standing near the runway barely looked up. New people arrived often. Most stayed quiet, did their jobs, and left without leaving a mark. Among the passengers was a new nurse assigned to the base hospital. She stepped down with a single duffel bag, no extra gear, no visible excitement or fear. Her uniform was neat, her movements calm and steady. She did not look around like a tourist or like someone trying to take everything in. She walked as if she already knew where she was going. A junior officer checked her papers quickly. Everything looked normal. Medical training, emergency care experience, previous overseas service. Nothing that stood out. Nothing that made anyone ask questions. She was waved through without delay. The base hospital sat near the edge of the compound, a long, low building made more for function than comfort. Inside, the smell of antiseptic mixed with sand and metal. The night shift was ending, and the day staff moved in with tired faces and coffee cups. The head nurse gave her a brief welcome. There was no long introduction, no tour meant to impress. Just a few basic rules, schedules, and expectations. The new nurse listened closely, nodded once, and asked only one question, where she was most needed. That answer seemed to please the head nurse. Short-staffed hospitals did not have time for chatter. She was sent straight to work. From the first hour, people noticed she was different, though no one could say exactly why. She did not rush, but she never wasted time. She checked equipment carefully, double-checked patient charts, and moved with quiet purpose. When wounded Marines came in from patrols, she spoke to them in a calm voice, never raising it, even when things got tense. Some of the younger Marines joked among themselves that she seemed too calm for someone new. Others said she probably had seen a lot before. In a place like this, everyone carried a past. It was not polite to ask. During a routine emergency drill later that day, alarms sounded to the hospital. Most of the staff followed the steps they had practiced many times. The new nurse did the same, but she also did something else. She noticed which doors took longer to close. She noticed which hallways stayed crowded the longest. She noticed which patients would be hardest to move if something went wrong. No one else noticed her noticing. When the drill ended, a Marine medic made a light comment about how serious she looked. She smiled briefly, said drills mattered, and went back to her station. The conversation ended there. At lunch, she sat alone, eating quickly and quietly. She did not scroll on a phone or join the loud table where Marines argued about sports and home. She finished, cleaned her area, and returned to work early. By evening, the hospital settled into its usual rhythm. Incoming patients slowed. The desert outside grew dark, and the temperature dropped. The base lights came on, casting long shadows across the ground. A senior Marine passed through the hospital on his way to check security. He paused for a moment, watching the new nurse work. She adjusted in four-line while keeping her eyes on the doorway, not in fear, but in awareness. When someone walked past behind her, she shifted slightly, giving herself space without looking rude or obvious. The Marine frowned for a second, then shook his head. He had seen too many deployments. He was reading into nothing. Later that night, a wounded Marine arrived with a leg injury from a training accident. The pain was intense, and he was close to panic. The new nurse took charge gently but firmly. She explained each step before doing it. Her hands were steady, her voice even. The Marine relaxed almost without realizing it. When the doctor arrived, everything was already prepared. The doctor nodded, impressed, but said nothing. Word spread quietly through the hospital that the new nurse was solid, reliable, someone you wanted on your shift. In a place where trust mattered more than titles. That was enough. Outside the hospital walls, the base carried on. Patrols went out and came back. Radios crackled with routine reports. Intelligence briefings mentioned possible threats in the area, but nothing immediate. The hospital remained low priority in everyone's mind. Attacks happened at gates, on roads, not in medical buildings. As midnight passed, the new nurse walked the halls one last time before taking a short rest. She checked doors, lights, and patients. She paused near a window and looked out at the dark desert for a few seconds, listening. Then she turned away. Just another nurse on a night shift, unseen and unremarkable to most. No one guessed that beneath the calm surface was someone trained for moments far worse than this. No one knew that if the quiet broke, she would not hesitate. For now, the base slept, unaware that the person least noticed might soon matter the most. The next few days passed quietly, but the calm felt thin, like a sheet stretched too tight. Life on the base followed its routine, yet small signs of tension crept in. Radio stayed active longer than usual. Patrols returned later than planned. Faces looked more serious, even during casual moments. Inside the hospital, the new nurse settled fully into her role. She learned the habits of the staff, the weak spots in schedules, and the rhythm of the building. She never asked questions that would draw attention. Instead, she listened. People talked freely around her because she did not seem like someone who judged or reported. A Marine medic mentioned that nearby villages had gone unusually quiet. Another spoke about a convoy that changed routes at the last minute. None of it sounded urgent on its own. Together, it created an uneasy feeling. During another drill, a stretcher jammed briefly in a narrow hallway. Most people laughed it off afterward. The new nurse did not. She quietly showed two staff members a better way to move patients through that space. She did it politely, without acting superior. They accepted the advice without thinking much about why it made sense. At night, she slept lightly. When a distant noise echoed across the base, she was awake before others stirred. She never left her assigned area or broke rules. She simply stayed alert. One evening, a group of Marines brought in a local civilian injured during a work accident near the base. The situation was tense. Language barriers, pain, fear. Voices rose. The new nurse stepped in calmly, using slow gestures and simple words. She lowered the room's energy without force. The patient settled. The Marines relaxed. Afterward, one of them said she handled pressure well. She replied that panic never helped anyone. Then she returned to cleaning her station. The hospital commander received an update later that night. Intelligence suggested hostile movement in the region. Nothing confirmed, nothing specific. The base went on higher awareness, not full alert. Extra guard were posted. The hospital remained open as usual. That decision would later be questioned, but at the time, it seemed reasonable. The following afternoon, the power flickered briefly. Just a second. Long enough for lights to dim, short enough for people to ignore it. Maintenance blamed the generator adjusting to load changes. The new nurse paused when it happened. She waited, listening. When nothing followed, she continued working, but her posture changed slightly. She positioned carts closer to walls. She kept essential supplies within reach. Another nurse asked if she was worried. She said power issues were common, and smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. As evening approached, wounded Marines arrived from a rough patrol. Dust-covered, tired, one with shrapnel cuts. The hospital grew busy. Voices overlapped. Equipment moved fast. In the middle of it all, the new nurse remained steady, guiding patients, assisting doctors, anticipating needs before they were spoken. A senior Marine watched her again, this time longer. She did not hesitate when alarms from different rooms sounded at once. She prioritized instantly, sending help where it mattered most. That kind of judgment usually came from long experience. Still, no one asked. After the rush slowed, the hospital settled into an uneasy quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying sand against the walls. The sky was dark with no moon. A guard radioed about movement near the outer fence. It turned out to be animals. Laughter followed. Tension eased slightly. The new nurse did not laugh. She checked the hallway nearest the emergency entrance again. Later, during a short break, another nurse asked about her past postings. She answered carefully. Overseas, long shifts, many emergencies, nothing that could be followed up on easily. The conversation drifted away. Just before midnight, a supply delivery was delayed. No clear reason. The driver reported road issues, then went silent for several minutes before checking back in. By the time the delay was resolved, the base command had already noted it. Inside the hospital, patients slept. Machines hummed softly. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air. The new nurse walked her usual round. She paused near the emergency exit and noticed something small but wrong. A door latch that felt looser than before. It could have been where? It could have been nothing. She reported it calmly. Maintenance said they would check in the morning. She did not argue. Instead, she adjusted her plan for the night. She stayed closer to that section of the building. She reviewed evacuation steps in her head. She placed a portable light where she could reach it fast. Somewhere beyond the base, engines moved through the dark. No one inside the hospital heard them. Just before the shift change, the power flickered again. This time it stayed off for 2 full seconds before emergency lights kicked in. People froze, then laughed nervously when the lights stabilized. The new nurse did not laugh. She moved toward the center of the hospital, scanning doorways, listening to the building itself. Her breathing slowed, her focus sharpened. Whatever was coming had not arrived yet, but it was close. Around her, staff continued their work, unaware that the margin for error was shrinking. The hospital, meant to heal and protect, stood exposed in the quiet night, and among all the uniforms and tired faces, the person most prepared for what was about to happen remained the one no one suspected. The night was still, but the calm felt heavier than before. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, dark and quiet. Inside the hospital, lights hummed softly, machines beeped steadily, and the few patients who were awake murmured quietly. Most staff had returned to their stations after short breaks, unaware that something unusual was approaching. Suddenly, the sound of distant engines broke the silence. Faint at first, it grew steadily louder. A few guards glanced up, thinking it was routine movement or another supply vehicle returning late. But something in the rhythm felt wrong. The new nurse paused, her hands on the bed of a recovering patient. Her senses sharpened, as if she could feel the tension in the air even before anyone else noticed it. A loud thud echoed from the outer fence, followed by more rapid, irregular sounds. Alarms did not go off immediately. It seemed the base security was still assessing. The new nurse took a breath and moved quickly but without panic. She reached the emergency room doors and quietly checked the exits in nearby hallways. Every step she took was calculated, silent, efficient. The first wave of intruders reached the hospital entrance. Their movements were clumsy in the dark, and their voices were muffled by sand and wind. Most of the staff remained unaware, attending to patients or preparing for routine checks. The new nurse positioned herself near the closest rooms to the entrance, keeping an eye on every shadow and sound. Her heart rate remained steady, but her mind ran through emergency protocols in a split second. When the attackers breached the outer doors, chaos would have erupted, but she acted first. She moved through the hallways, guiding patients to safer rooms, blocking doors when necessary, and ensuring that no one was left behind. Her hands moved swiftly, securing equipment and moving medical supplies where they could be easily accessed. Every instruction she gave was short, clear, and calm. It carried authority that no one questioned. The first intruders reached the main corridor, and screams began. Staff froze, unsure what to do. Without hesitation, the new nurse directed them to safe zones, giving concise orders in a tone that brooked no argument. She moved between patients and attackers in a blur of measured steps, minimizing exposure and directing others to cover. The hospital staff, stunned at first, slowly began to follow her instructions. Some Marines who had been off duty were called to assist. They were armed, but unprepared for precision and discipline of the new nurse's movement. She anticipated the intruders' choices, blocked access points, and coordinated the positioning of staff and patients to reduce vulnerability. The attackers, expecting chaos, encountered organized resistance instead. One of the intruders lunged a supply cart near the emergency room. She intercepted, using force only enough to neutralize the immediate threat without causing unnecessary harm. The Marine nearby looked on in disbelief. It was precise, efficient, and unmistakably trained. He could not comprehend how someone with no visible combat gear or weapons could act with such control. As minutes stretched, the new nurse continued to manage multiple crises at once. Patients needing urgent care were prioritized, wounds were tended, and injured staff were guided to safer areas. All the while, she kept an eye on exits, windows, and hallways, ensuring no one could sneak up behind her or escape unnoticed. By the time additional security forces arrived, the attackers had been contained. No one in the hospital had been seriously harmed. Staff and patients were shaken, but alive, thanks to her swift intervention. The senior Marine in charge arrived, finally seeing the scene fully organized. Supplies were intact, patients secured, and the hallways cleared. Confusion and fear lingered, but so did a growing respect for the one who had taken control. Once the situation stabilized, the commanding officer approached the new nurse. He wanted answers, explanations for the calm, organized response under pressure. She explained succinctly. She had military experience, had trained for emergencies, and had been briefed on handling high-risk situations in medical environments. She did not elaborate on her full past or status. Her tone was simple, factual, and unflinching. The Marines and hospital staff were in awe. Someone they had barely noticed, someone they assumed was just another nurse, had acted with the precision of a seasoned combat operator. The realization slowly sank in. Their new colleague had saved lives not only through medical skill, but through strategic action and foresight. Outside, the engines faded, leaving the desert silent once again. The base lights reflected off the sand, and the calm returned. But inside the hospital, the impression of the night lingered. Staff spoke in hushed tones about what just happened, each retelling highlighting her focus, her calm, and her leadership under pressure. The new nurse walked through the hospital slowly, checking each patient and staff member. She ensured everyone was accounted for, injuries properly treated, and that there was no lingering danger. Each movement was deliberate, quiet, and precise. To anyone observing, it seemed almost like routine, yet those who had been part of the crisis knew otherwise. Later, the commanding officer gathered the staff to debrief. He carefully avoided naming her in public, wanting to respect her privacy and perhaps conceal her true abilities. Still, those who witnessed the night's events exchanged glances of deep respect. Whispers of amazement moved through the hospital, but no one dared to ask too many questions. As the night progressed, the new nurse returned to her station. She checked supplies, patient vitals, and equipment, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her calm demeanor remained, her movements unchanged, her eyes alert. She had acted decisively when needed, and now she allowed herself a brief moment of observation, simply listening to the quiet of the building. No one outside the hospital would have guessed the intensity of what had just taken place. Inside, the memory of her actions will remain vivid, a testament to the skills and courage hidden behind an unassuming face. The staff would remember not only the events, but the way she led without panic, without self-promotion, and without fear. For the new nurse, it was another shift completed. For the hospital, it was a night they would never forget. And for the Marines, it was the moment they realized that appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the person least expected to act might be the one to save everyone. Morning arrived slowly, with the sun casting pale light over the base. The desert air was cooler than expected, and for the first time in hours, a sense of calm settled over the hospital. Staff moved through the hallways with measured steps, attending to patients and cleaning up after the chaos of the night before. Though nothing had been seriously damaged, the memory of events lingered in every corner. The commanding officer walked through the hospital, observing quietly. He noted the efficiency of staff, the orderliness of the rooms, and the swift return to routine. But his eyes kept returning to the nurse who had quietly led everyone through the attack. She was arranging medical supplies on a cart, her posture relaxed, her movements deliberate. No hint of the stress from the previous night showed in her face. He cleared his throat and called her aside. The hall was empty enough for a private conversation. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed to understand the extent of her capabilities. The nurse listened without interrupting, nodding as he spoke, her calm demeanor never faltering. He asked how she had managed to maintain control, to anticipate movements and guide the staff so effectively. She replied simply that she had training in high-pressure situations, experience with emergency coordination, and a focus on keeping people safe. She did not elaborate, and he respected the restraint. Her professionalism was clear. The commanding officer asked if she had any prior combat experience. Her response was measured. Yes. She had served in various challenging environments, though she remained vague. Her tone conveyed confidence, competence, and a quiet authority that had guided everyone through the crisis. He sensed there was more she could say, but she chose to let her actions speak for themselves. Later that morning, the staff gathered for a debrief. Some were hesitant, unsure how to describe the events without causing alarm. The commanding officer guided the discussion, emphasizing lessons learned, security improvements, and the importance of staying alert. Praise was given, but always to the team as a whole. No single person was singled out publicly, though eyes kept drifting toward the new nurse. Those who had worked closely with her during the attack began to understand why she had acted so decisively. She had anticipated obstacles, managed resources, and made split-second decisions that minimized risk. Her approach was not about showing skill. It was about protecting lives. The staff realized that she had saved them from a situation that could have become much worse. After the debrief, a few Marines approached her quietly. They spoke in low voices, expressing gratitude and a hint of awe. They asked questions about how she had known what to do, how she had stayed so calm. She answered simply, reminding them that staying calm and focused was the best way to help others. She emphasized teamwork, preparation, and awareness, framing her guidance in a way that encouraged learning rather than highlighting her own ability. Throughout the day, news of the night's events traveled quietly across the base. Staff shared their stories in small groups, emphasizing her composure, leadership, and the way she seemed to always be in the right place at the right time. The commanding officer watched these interactions, noting the growing respect and admiration for someone who had remained largely anonymous until now. As the sun climbed higher, the nurse moved to the hospital, checking on patients, staff, and equipment. She assessed damage, ensured everyone was accounted for, and maintained routines. Her presence was reassuring. Everyone who encountered her felt calmer, more secure, as if she carried a quiet strength that could withstand any challenge. Later in the afternoon, the commanding officer requested a private meeting with her once again. This time, he was ready to address the truth. He explained that the base leadership had reviewed footage, reports, and accounts from the night before. The precision, calm, and leadership displayed were consistent with someone who had undergone specialized training beyond ordinary nursing practice. He asked her directly if she was, in fact, a member of the Navy SEALs. She paused, considering her response. Then she nodded. She confirmed that she had been temporarily assigned to the hospital, that her role had been deliberately understated, and that her priority had always been the safety of the base and its personnel. The commanding officer absorbed this information, his expression shifting from curiosity to admiration. The nurse's revelation changed the way staff viewed her. To the Marines who had been present during the attack, it explained everything: the calm under pressure, the decisive actions, the ability to manage multiple crises at once. They began to see her not just as a nurse, but as a trained warrior who had seamlessly combined medical skill with tactical expertise. Throughout the remainder of the day, the staff treated her with a new kind of respect. Questions were still asked, but with humility and interest rather than doubt. She answered patiently, sharing insight where appropriate, emphasizing teamwork, situational awareness, and the importance of preparation. Her focus remained on supporting the staff, not on seeking recognition for her abilities. By evening, the hospital had returned to a sense of normalcy. The staff were weary but grateful, having faced a challenge they had never imagined and survived largely intact. The commanding officer made arrangements to document the events in official reports, ensuring that the contribution of the new nurse would be recognized within appropriate channels while maintaining operational discretion. As night approached again, the nurse walked the familiar corridors, checking doors, equipment, and patient areas. She ensured that protocols were followed and that everyone felt safe. Her presence was steady and reassuring, a silent reminder that the events of the previous night were under control. She paused briefly near a window, looking out at the desert and the fading light. The air was still and quiet, and for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The knowledge of what had happened and what could have happened weighed lightly on her, but she remained composed. She had fulfilled her role, protected those under her care, and maintained control when it mattered most. For the Marines and hospital staff, the day had been a turning point. They had witnessed courage, skill, and professionalism in a way that had exceeded their expectations. The nurse, once a quiet and unassuming presence, had become a figure of quiet admiration and respect. And though she continued to move through her duties with the same calm and dedication as always, everyone around her understood something that could not be taught, that appearances can be deceiving, and that true skill and bravery often come from those who least seek recognition. Days passed after the attack, but the hospital carried a quiet sense of vigilance. Staff moved through their routines, but the experience had left its mark. Conversations were subdued, but whenever they drifted to the events of that night, eyes would often wander toward the new nurse. She carried herself the same way as before, calm, composed, and focused, but now there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the difference she had made. Patients continued to arrive from nearby patrols and training exercises, some injured, others sick, but the hospital ran smoothly. The staff worked together, following procedures refined through experience and strengthened by lessons from the recent crisis. Even the most junior personnel seemed more aware, more careful, as if they had absorbed some of her poise and decisiveness simply by watching her move through the halls. The commanding officer requested a small meeting with the hospital leadership team. They gathered in a quiet room away from the patients, discussing improvements to security, patient flow, and emergency protocols. The new nurse was present, not as a leader seeking credit, but as an experienced voice offering insight. Her suggestions were practical, precise, and easy to implement. She spoke calmly, pointing out areas where minor changes could make a significant difference in safety and efficiency. Outside, the base carried on its normal operations. Patrols went out and returned, vehicles moved along the dirt roads, and life continued in the harsh desert environment. Yet, inside the hospital, there was a subtle shift. Staff who had once seen the new nurse as just another colleague now regarded her with quiet respect. They noticed how she anticipated needs, how she remained composed even when situations became difficult, and how she quietly ensured the safety of those around her. One afternoon, a group of Marines stopped by the hospital to thank her personally. They spoke about how her actions had saved lives, how her calm presence had kept fear from spreading, and how her guidance had allowed everyone to work together more effectively. She listened, acknowledging their words with simple nods and short responses. She never claimed credit, always redirecting attention to teamwork and preparation. The impact of the night's events extended beyond gratitude. Staff and patients alike had a new awareness of the importance of vigilance, planning, and clear communication. They had seen firsthand how one person, acting with skill and foresight, could influence the outcome of a crisis. That realization carried weight, not just in the hospital, but across the base, influencing training, routines, and attitudes towards safety. As the days went by, the new nurse continued her duties with the same dedication and attention to detail as before. She checked supplies, monitored patients, and guided staff with a quiet authority. Her presence was reassuring, a steadying force amid the unpredictability of the desert base. No one who observed her closely could ignore the experience and competence she brought to her role. The commanding officer called her for another private conversation. He thanked her again for her actions and confirmed that the base leadership would ensure her efforts were recognized appropriately. She appreciated the acknowledgement, but remained focused on her work. Recognition was secondary to her mission of keeping the hospital and its patients safe. During a brief moment of rest, she walked through the hospital corridors, pausing to observe the staff as they worked. She saw the junior nurses more confident, the medics more attentive, and the patients calmer. The lessons from the night of the attack had been absorbed quietly, almost unconsciously, and her influence had become part of the hospital's rhythm. Evening came again, casting long shadows across the base. The desert air was cooler, and the staff prepared for the night shift. The hospital had regained a sense of normalcy, but the memory of the attack and the skill of the nurse remained vivid in the minds of those who had witnessed it. They had learned something that could not be taught in training manuals. The value of calm, clear thinking under pressure, and the difference one capable person could make. She paused at a window, looking out over the desert as the sun dipped below the horizon. The silence was profound, broken only by a distant wind and the occasional call from a guard. In that quiet, she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect. She thought of the people who had been in danger, the choices she had made, and the teamwork that had made the difference. Her satisfaction was quiet and private, rooted in knowing that her actions had kept others safe. Back inside, the hospital staff continued their work. Machines hummed, patients slept, and supplies were checked and prepared for the night. The new nurse moved among them, a calm and steady presence. She offered guidance where needed, reassured the worried, and quietly ensured that every detail was accounted for. Over time, the story of her actions spread across the base. People who had not been present during the attack heard the accounts, always focusing on her composure, judgment, and skill. She never sought attention, never demanded recognition, but her reputation grew quietly, built on the respect of those who had seen her in action. Weeks later, the hospital resumed full routine operations, running efficiently and smoothly. Staff had integrated lessons learned from the crisis, always keeping safety and preparedness in mind. The new nurse continued to work alongside them, her role unchanged in function, but now recognized for the depth of experience and capability she brought. For the Marines and hospital personnel, the experience became a point of reference, a story they would recall when teaching, training, or facing new challenges. The nurse, once overlooked and underestimated, had become a symbol of courage, skill, and quiet leadership. Her presence reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, and that true strength often came from those who worked without fanfare. As night fell over the desert once more, the hospital was calm. Patients slept, staff moved with care and purpose, and the new nurse made her rounds, checking on everyone, making sure nothing was overlooked. She carried the weight of her responsibility lightly, focused on her mission, and trusted the team she had helped strengthen. And in that quiet routine, life on the base continued. The events of the past nights became part of the stories shared in quiet conversations, lessons learned, and the unspoken respect between colleagues. The nurse remained the same, calm, dedicated, and skilled, yet her impact would be remembered long after her shift ended, a testament to quiet courage and competence that had saved lives when it mattered most.